Imagine discovering your sibling, the one you grew up with, lied about being broke just to swindle your inheritance, and then watching their whole life fall apart while yours soared to new heights. That's my story. It all started on a cold Monday morning, the kind where everything feels heavy and off. My parents had passed away just 2 weeks before in a car accident that still didn't feel real. My siblings and I were all still reeling from the loss. Our family lawyer, Mr. Green, called us in for a meeting to finalize the will. I thought it would be straightforward, split evenly among the three of us. But when I arrived, the atmosphere in the room felt charged, like someone was holding back. Mr. Green handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my mom's delicate cursive. "Your mother left this specifically for you," he said, his voice laced with sympathy. Alex, my sibling, sat beside me, looking as nervous as I felt. My hands shook as I opened it, the crackle of paper deafening in the quiet room. The letter began warmly, the way Mom always wrote, full of love and care. But the tone shifted halfway through. She explained that Alex had been struggling financially for years, and she was deeply worried about their future. "They need more help than you do," the letter read. "I know this is a lot to ask, but I trust you to understand. Please consider giving up your share of the inheritance to help Alex get back on their feet." I froze, the words blurring as I reread them. My heart dropped into my stomach. My mom was asking me to give up everything, my future, my safety net, my plans, so Alex could have a chance to start over. Alex was watching me, their expression unreadable. "What does it say?" they asked softly. I couldn't answer right away. My mind was spinning. This was my mom. She wouldn't have written this lightly. I finally managed to explain the gist of it, and Alex's reaction floored me. Their face crumpled, and they started sobbing. "I didn't know she was going to do this," they said, choking on their words. "I don't even deserve this kind of trust." It was such a vulnerable moment that my resentment crumbled, at least temporarily. I told them I needed time to think, and they nodded, thanking me profusely for even considering it. For the next few nights, I barely slept. I turned the situation over and over in my mind. Giving up the inheritance would mean delaying my dreams of owning a home, traveling, and starting my own business. But how could I say no to my mom's last wish? Eventually, I decided to honor her request. It felt like the right thing to do, even if it hurt. I called Alex to let them know, and they broke down again, thanking me over and over. We met for coffee, and they promised they'd never forget this, that they'd work hard to make Mom proud. I believed them. But as the weeks passed, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like an itch I couldn't scratch. Alex's gratitude felt too polished, too rehearsed, and I noticed little inconsistencies in their stories. One day, they'd talk about struggling to make rent. The next, they'd casually mention a new gadget or some other luxury that didn't fit their supposed financial situation. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself I was just paranoid, maybe even a little bitter about giving up my share. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I started keeping track of the things Alex said and did, not even sure what I was looking for. The turning point came at a family dinner when Alex mentioned a friend who had taken them out for a lavish meal at a 5-star restaurant. It was a throwaway comment, but the way they stumbled over their words set off alarms in my head. If they were so broke, how were they running in circles where 5-star dinners were normal? That night, I couldn't shake the sense that I'd made a huge mistake. I had no proof, no concrete reason to doubt Alex, but my gut told me something was wrong. And as much as I wanted to trust my sibling, I knew I had to find out the truth. Life had started to settle into a strange, new normal after I gave up my inheritance. I focused on my job, tried to save what little I could, and reminded myself that I'd made the right decision. But then, a few months later, whispers started to reach me, innocent at first, like background noise. It began with a mutual friend, Jessica, casually mentioning how she'd run into Alex at a high-end steakhouse downtown. "They looked amazing," she said, laughing. I didn't even recognize them at first. They were so put together. I thought they were struggling, though. Her words stuck with me. Alex had claimed to be cutting every corner to make ends meet, so a steakhouse dinner seemed odd. But I brushed it off. Maybe someone else had paid, or maybe they'd saved up for a special treat. Then, another friend, Rachel, mentioned seeing Alex in a designer clothing store. "They were browsing this rack of silk blouses," she said, wrinkling her nose. Not exactly where I'd shop if I was broke. I laughed it off, trying not to sound defensive. "Maybe they were just window shopping?" I suggested. But deep down, it planted a seed of doubt. The tipping point came when my friend David sent me a photo. It was Alex, lounging by an infinity pool with a mimosa in hand, looking more relaxed than I'd seen them in years. The photo had been snapped at a luxury spa David's cousin worked at, one that was way out of Alex's supposed budget. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That evening, I called Alex. "Hey," I started, trying to keep my voice casual. "How are you holding up?" "Things still tough." There was a pause before Alex replied, their tone tinged with forced optimism. "Yeah, just taking it one day at a time. It's been rough, but we're managing." I took a deep breath. "David sent me a picture of you at that spa last weekend. Looked nice. How do you afford that?" "Oh, that." Alex laughed nervously. "That was a surprise from my partner. They booked it as a treat for us. I had no idea until we got there. We're just trying to find little moments of joy, even when things are hard." Their answer seemed plausible enough, but something about their tone felt rehearsed. I wanted to believe them, I really did. But the growing inconsistencies in their stories were starting to gnaw at me. As the weeks went by, more stories trickled in. Someone saw Alex driving a new car. Another person mentioned spotting them at a private wine tasting event. Each time, I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe their partner was footing the bill. Maybe they had a side hustle I didn't know about. But the doubts were building. My frustration boiled over one night when I saw a social media post from Alex's partner. They tagged Alex in a photo at a rooftop party with a caption that read, "Living our best lives." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Living their best lives? On what money? I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I called Alex again, my voice sharper this time. "Hey, I'm not trying to pry, but how exactly are you affording all these things? The spa, the new car, the parties, what's going on?" Alex sighed, sounding exasperated. "I told you, my partner's been helping a lot. They've been working overtime to make sure we can have some nice things now and then." "I hate that you're doubting me." I felt a pang of guilt. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the stress of giving up the inheritance was making me suspicious. But at the same time, my gut told me there was more to this story. That night, I sat down at my desk and made a list of all the strange things I'd noticed about Alex's behavior. The inconsistencies, the luxurious outings, the vague explanations, it all pointed to something being off. I decided I needed answers. Not just for my peace of mind, but because I felt like I'd been played. I started small, combing through old messages and emails, looking for anything that didn't line up. Then I remembered something Alex had mentioned in passing, a side job they'd picked up to make extra cash. I searched for the company online, but it didn't exist. That was the moment everything clicked. Alex wasn't just stretching the truth, they were lying. And I wasn't about to let it slide. It was time to dig deeper, and I wasn't prepared for what I was about to uncover. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Every story Alex had told me since my parents' passing seemed more like a patchwork of half-truths and convenient excuses. It wasn't just the inconsistencies in their tales. It was the nagging thought that Alex's lifestyle didn't match their supposed financial struggles. One night, I decided to comb through our old texts and emails. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe some casual mention of their partner covering expenses, or an explanation I'd somehow overlooked. But the more I scrolled, the clearer it became that Alex had been careful, too careful. Their messages were vague, as though they were deliberately avoiding giving away too much. Then, I stumbled across the email. It was buried in my inbox from months ago, around the time I'd handed over my share of the inheritance. The subject line was innocuous, "Thanks for being there," but when I opened it, my heart stopped. The email wasn't meant for me. It was a forwarded receipt for a bank transfer to an account I'd never heard of. The transfer amount? A staggering 6 figures. My initial shock gave way to confusion. If Alex was broke, where had that kind of money come from? I read the email over and over, hoping I'd missed something, but there was no denying it. The account wasn't just some regular checking account, it was an investment account. Curious and desperate for more information, I copied the account number and started searching online. It led me to a financial institution I recognized as exclusive to high-net-worth clients. The final blow came when I found the account's estimated balance, buried in the details of the forwarded receipt, more than 3 times what my share of the inheritance had been. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Alex wasn't just doing fine, they were thriving. And they'd lied to me, lied to our mom, lied to everyone. I felt sick. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust, about the bond we were supposed to have as siblings. Our mom had spent her last days worried sick about Alex, guilt-tripping me into giving up my future to save theirs. And it had all been a lie. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there in black and white. Alex had taken advantage of everyone's love and concern. Worst of all, they'd used our mother's dying wish as a weapon to manipulate me. I knew I couldn't confront Alex without more proof. They were too smooth, too quick with their excuses. I needed to be absolutely certain before I called them out. I spent the next several days piecing together a timeline. I cross-referenced dates from the bank transfer email with the times Alex had claimed to be struggling. Every detail pointed to the same conclusion. Alex had never been broke. They'd been hiding their money in this account, all while playing the victim. The more I dug, the angrier I became. I thought back to all the times I'd gone out of my way to help Alex, even when it stretched me thin. I thought about the sleepless nights, wondering if I'd made the right choice, sacrificing my share of the inheritance so they could have a chance. And I thought about my mom, trusting Alex's story enough to write me that letter. Finally, I decided to reach out to someone who might know more. I called Jessica, the mutual friend who'd mentioned Alex's fancy outings. "Hey, quick question," I started, trying to keep my tone casual. "Did Alex ever say anything about, like, a side hustle or a sudden windfall?" Jessica hesitated. Not directly, but there was this one time they joked about having hidden assets. I thought they were just being sarcastic. Hidden assets. The phrase hung in the air like a bad smell. That night, I called a financial advisor I knew through work. I didn't give them the full story, but I asked how someone might hide large sums of money without drawing attention. Their answers, offshore accounts, shell corporations, and trusts, only deepened my suspicion. By the time I'd gathered enough evidence, I was running on pure adrenaline. I still hadn't decided how I would confront Alex, but I knew I needed to see the full picture. I emailed the financial institution associated with a mysterious account, pretending to be a potential client interested in opening a similar account. My goal was simple: gather as much information as possible about how these accounts worked and whether there were ways to trace ownership. The response was eye-opening. While most of the details were generic, one line stood out: "Our accounts are fully secure, but we recommend clients avoid discussing their holdings publicly to maintain confidentiality." That's when it hit me. Alex's vague stories, their reluctance to give specifics, it all made sense. They'd been guarding their secret, terrified it would come out. Now I had to decide what to do. Confronting Alex outright was tempting, but I knew they'd deny everything unless I backed them into a corner. I needed to find a way to force the truth out of them, to make them face what they'd done. But as angry as I was, I couldn't shake a lingering sense of sadness. This wasn't just about the money. This was about family, about betrayal on a level I never thought I'd experience. I resolved to move forward carefully. Alex had lied to me, to our mom, to everyone. But now, the ball was in my court, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Once I'd uncovered the existence of Alex's hidden bank account, I knew I was dealing with a situation far bigger than I'd initially imagined. It wasn't just about a bit of extra cash on the side. It was about deliberate deception on a scale that felt impossible to comprehend. My trust in Alex had already been shaken, but now it was dangling by a thread. Still, I hesitated. Accusing someone of lying about their financial status, especially when that lie had impacted my own future so profoundly, wasn't something I could do lightly. I needed undeniable proof, evidence so concrete that even Alex's most elaborate excuses couldn't hold up. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. It felt extreme at first, like something out of a bad soap opera. Who hires a PI to investigate their sibling? But every time I thought about letting it go, I pictured the sacrifices I'd made, the countless plans I'd put on hold because I thought Alex needed the money more than I did. I couldn't let it slide. The investigator I hired, a no-nonsense woman named Teresa, came highly recommended. She had a reputation for uncovering the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. I explained the situation to her as best I could without breaking down. She listened intently, asking precise questions about Alex's habits, known assets, and relationships. When I finished, Teresa leaned back in her chair and said, "If there's something to find, I'll find it. Give me a couple of weeks." The waiting was agonizing. Every day felt like a lifetime, and every interaction with Alex became a minefield. They continued to play the part of the struggling sibling, occasionally dropping hints about financial woes that I now knew were complete fabrications. I had to bite my tongue to keep from blurting out what I'd already discovered. 2 weeks later, Teresa called me to schedule a meeting. "I've got the information you were looking for," she said, her tone as neutral as ever. I could tell she was used to dealing with emotional clients, but I appreciated her professionalism. When I arrived at her office, Teresa handed me a thick envelope. "This is everything I found," she said. "Take your time going through it and let me know if you have any questions." I waited until I was home to open the envelope, my hands shaking with anticipation. Inside was a detailed report that left no stone unturned. The first few pages focused on Alex's financial accounts. Teresa had managed to trace not one, but 3 separate accounts, all containing significant sums of money. 2 were held domestically, and the third was overseas, in a country notorious for its lax banking regulations. Together, the accounts totaled a figure so staggering that I had to read it twice to believe it. Then came the property records. Alex had quietly purchased a small vacation home in another state, registered under an LLC to keep it off the radar. There were also indications that they'd been renting a high-end apartment in the city, despite claiming to live in a modest suburban rental. But what truly made my blood boil was the section on luxury purchases. Over the past year, Alex had spent tens of thousands on designer clothes, high-end electronics, and exclusive memberships to clubs and services I hadn't even known existed. The receipts, meticulously documented by Teresa, painted a picture of a life that was anything but struggling. The final section of the report was perhaps the most damning. Teresa had uncovered evidence that Alex's so-called debt crisis was entirely fabricated. The loan documents they'd shown our mom, the ones that supposedly justified their desperate need for financial help, were fake. They'd been created using online templates and were riddled with inconsistencies. When I finished reading, I sat in stunned silence, the weight of the betrayal settling over me like a heavy blanket. This was my sibling, the person I'd grown up with, shared holidays and childhood secrets with. How could they do this? I thought back to all the times Alex had looked me in the eye and lied. The crocodile tears, the heartfelt speeches about struggling to make ends meet. It had all been an act. They hadn't just stolen money. They'd stolen my trust, my sense of security, and my faith in the bond we shared as siblings. For a moment, I considered calling Alex right then and there, screaming at them, demanding answers. But I stopped myself. This wasn't the time for an emotional confrontation. If I wanted to hold Alex accountable, I needed to wait for the perfect moment, one where they couldn't wiggle out of the truth. In the meantime, I started planning. I wasn't just going to confront Alex, I was going to expose them. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go as far as involving legal authorities, but one thing was certain. Alex wasn't going to get away with this. Every time I saw them after that, it took all my self-control not to let anything slip. They were still playing the role of the struggling sibling, and I played along, nodding sympathetically while quietly seething inside. The betrayal burned, but it also fueled me. I'd given up so much for Alex, believing I was helping them out of genuine hardship. Now, I was determined to reclaim not just my share of the inheritance, but my dignity as well. I didn't know exactly how the confrontation would play out, but one thing was clear. Alex's charade was about to come crashing down, and I was going to be the one to pull the rug out from under them. The opportunity for the confrontation presented itself at our cousin Emily's birthday dinner. It was a family gathering at her house, a casual but well-attended event that brought together relatives we hadn't seen in months. I knew Alex would be there. They never missed an occasion to network and bask in the family's admiration. I spent most of the evening keeping my distance, watching Alex work the room like the charming, lovable sibling everyone thought they were. They laughed, joked, and even told a self-deprecating story about their supposed financial struggles, painting themselves as the resilient underdog. My stomach churned every time someone offered them sympathy or advice. By the time dessert was served, I could barely keep my composure. But I'd promised myself I wouldn't ruin Emily's night. I waited patiently, sipping water to calm my nerves, until most of the guests had left and only a few family members lingered in the living room. That's when I saw my chance. "Alex," I said, keeping my voice steady, "can we talk privately for a minute?" They looked surprised but nodded, following me out to the backyard. The night was quiet, the air cool against my skin. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Alex glanced at me, their expression a mix of curiosity and unease. "What's up?" they asked, trying to sound casual. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope from Teresa, the private investigator. "I know," I said, my voice low but firm. "I know everything." Alex frowned, pretending not to understand. "What are you talking about?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I handed them the first page of the report, the one detailing their hidden bank accounts. "This is yours, isn't it?" Their face drained of color as they scanned the page. "Where did you get this?" they stammered. "That doesn't matter," I said, my tone sharpening. What matters is that you lied. To me, to Mom, to everyone. You said you were broke, Alex. You said you needed help. But you were sitting on more money than I'll probably ever see in my life. Alex tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. You've got it all wrong, they said quickly. This isn't what it looks like. Oh, really? I shot back, pulling out another page, this one detailing their property purchases. And what about this? Or this? I flipped through the pages, pointing to each damning piece of evidence. The vacation home? The luxury apartment? The fake debt story you fed Mom, so she'd write me that letter? They froze, their eyes darting between me and the papers. I was trying to protect the family legacy, they blurted out. I didn't want Mom to worry about how I was managing things. And you didn't need the money as much as I did. You're fine. The sheer audacity of their words left me momentarily speechless. You're kidding, right? I finally said, my voice rising. You stole from me, Alex. You lied to Mom on her deathbed to manipulate me into giving up my inheritance. And for what? So you could play rich while I'm out here scraping by. Alex's mask of composure crumbled. I didn't mean for it to go this far, they said, their voice trembling. I thought I could fix things before anyone found out. I didn't want to hurt you. Hurt me? I repeated, incredulous. You destroyed any trust one had in you. You didn't just hurt me, you betrayed me. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Alex looked like they wanted to say something else, but I didn't give them the chance. I'm done, Alex, I said, my voice cold. I'm done being the trusting, naive sibling. You've made your bed, and now you get to lie in it. Don't come to me for help when everything falls apart. I turned and walked back into the house, leaving Alex standing alone in the yard. My hands were shaking, but I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I'd taken control of the situation. As I rejoined the few remaining family members, I kept my expression neutral, even as my heart raced. I didn't know what Alex would do next, deny everything, spin another story, or try to make amends. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Over the next few days, I waited for Alex to reach out. I expected an angry call, a tearful apology, or maybe even an attempt to turn the family against me. But the silence was deafening. When I finally heard from them, it was a short, vague text. Let's talk. I didn't respond. Alex had spent months, maybe years, weaving a web of lies, and now it was starting to unravel. I wasn't about to help them clean up their mess. As much as it hurt to sever the bond we'd once shared, I knew I couldn't trust them again. And I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. This was just the beginning of a new chapter. One where I took control of my life and my future without letting anyone take advantage of me again. After the confrontation at Emily's birthday, I knew I couldn't keep Alex in my life. Their betrayal had cut so deeply that even the thought of hearing their voice or seeing their name on my phone made me feel physically ill. The Alex I thought I knew, the sibling I grew up with, laughed with, and trusted implicitly was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. The first thing I did was block their number. It felt petty at first, but I realized I needed the distance. Alex was a master manipulator, and I couldn't give them any more opportunities to twist the narrative or guilt-trip me into forgiving them. Next, I stopped going to places where I knew Alex might show up. Family gatherings, mutual friends parties, anything that risked an awkward run-in was off the table. I hated isolating myself, but I wasn't ready to face them again, and I wasn't about to pretend everything was fine. Finally, I started telling the truth to the people who mattered. Mutual friends and family members had started asking why Alex and I weren't talking, and I didn't hold back. I told them about the inheritance, the lies, and the mountain of evidence I'd uncovered. The reactions were mixed. Some people were horrified, immediately siding with me and expressing their disgust at Alex's behavior. Others, especially those closer to Alex, tried to play peacemaker. They made a mistake, one cousin said. Your family. Isn't that worth more than money? I didn't argue, but I didn't budge either. This wasn't about money. It was about trust, and Alex had shattered mine beyond repair. Over time, word spread about what Alex had done. They hadn't just betrayed me, they'd betrayed our mother's memory, twisting her final wishes for their own gain. Most of the family came to understand why I'd cut them off, even if they didn't fully agree with my decision. Meanwhile, Alex's perfect life started to unravel. It was subtle at first, just little cracks in the facade. They stopped posting flashy photos on social media, and mutual friends mentioned seeing them looking stressed or disheveled. Then the stories started trickling in. Alex had overextended themselves financially, relying on credit and loans to maintain their luxurious lifestyle. They'd assumed the money would keep flowing indefinitely, that no one would catch on to their lies. But when I cut ties, it must have sent a ripple through their carefully constructed world. Within months, the luxury trips, high-end dinners, and designer shopping sprees ground to a halt. People began whispering that Alex had sold their vacation home and was downsizing their apartment. The final blow came when I heard through the grapevine that Alex had declared bankruptcy. The news didn't surprise me. They'd been living far beyond their means, and their lies had finally caught up with them. I wish I could say I felt sad or conflicted when I heard about Alex's downfall, but honestly, it felt like justice. Karma in its purest form. For so long, I'd been the one making sacrifices, working harder, and going without so Alex could have more. Watching them lose everything they'd gained through deceit was oddly satisfying, even if it didn't erase the hurt they'd caused. Still, there were moments when the bitterness crept in. I'd think about the life I could have had if I'd kept my inheritance, the home I could have bought, the trips I could have taken, the financial security I'd given up. But then I'd remind myself that I was better off without Alex in my life. Cutting ties hadn't just freed me from their manipulation, it had given me the chance to rebuild on my own terms. I started focusing on myself in ways I never had before. I took on extra projects at work, saved up for a small but meaningful vacation, and even signed up for a cooking class I'd been eyeing for years. Little by little, I reclaimed the parts of my life that I'd put on hold for Alex's sake. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I felt the weight of everything I'd lost. But there was also a sense of liberation in knowing I didn't owe anyone anything anymore. As for Alex, I heard bits and pieces about their situation through mutual acquaintances. They were still trying to claw their way out of the financial hole they'd dug, and their once glamorous social circle had all but abandoned them. I didn't feel sorry for them, but I also didn't feel the need to gloat. Cutting ties had given me something more valuable than revenge. It had given me peace. Cutting Alex out of my life was both liberating and devastating. I felt free from their manipulations, but the emotional weight of what I'd lost, both financially and personally, was a lot to bear. It wasn't just the inheritance. It was the trust, the bond, the sense of family that had been shattered. Still, I knew I couldn't stay in that place of bitterness forever. I had to move forward, even if it felt like starting from scratch. The first thing I did was reassess my finances. Losing my share of the inheritance had left a noticeable gap in my plans, so I made the difficult decision to pick up a second job. It wasn't glamorous. I worked evenings at a cafe after my 9-to-5, but it helped me build up a savings cushion. I also started looking into personal development. I'd always dreamed of owning my own business, but I realized I didn't have the skills or knowledge to make it happen yet. So I signed up for evening classes in accounting and marketing. At first, it felt overwhelming to juggle 2 jobs and school, but the sense of progress kept me going. There were nights when the exhaustion hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd come home, drop onto the couch, and wonder if I'd ever feel secure again. Sometimes I'd cry, letting out the frustration of losing what I'd worked so hard to build. But every morning, I reminded myself why I was doing it. This wasn't just about bouncing back. It was about proving to myself that I could thrive without anyone's help. As time went on, the small victories started to add up. After months of saving, I finally had enough to take a short vacation, a solo trip to a nearby beach town. It wasn't extravagant, but it was the first time in years I'd done something just for me. Walking along the shoreline, feeling the sand under my feet, I realized how far I'd come. Not long after, I landed a new job with a higher salary. It wasn't just a financial win, it was a validation of my hard work and resilience. With the extra income, I was able to cut back on my second job and focus more on my long-term goals. Around the same time, I met someone who changed my life in ways I hadn't expected. Their name was Sam, and we met at one of my evening classes. At first, we bonded over our shared frustration with group projects, but our connection quickly deepened. Sam was kind, supportive, and fiercely independent, everything I needed after the ordeal with Alex. Building a relationship with Sam was like rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. They encouraged me to take risks, to dream bigger, to believe in my own potential. With their support, I started making real strides toward my goals. One of the biggest milestones came when I finally had enough saved to invest in a small business. It wasn't anything flashy, just an online store selling handmade home goods, but it was mine. Watching it grow, seeing my hard work translate into something tangible, was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Sam and I celebrated every step forward, from my first sale to my first profitable month. We even started planning trips together, something I never thought I could afford. Traveling had always been a dream of mine, but it had felt out of reach for so long. The first trip we took was to Italy, a place I'd dreamed of visiting since I was a teenager. Walking through the cobblestone streets of Florence, tasting fresh pasta in a tiny family-owned restaurant, and standing in awe of the Sistine Chapel felt like reclaiming a part of myself that Alex's betrayal had tried to take away. Every step forward felt like a victory, not just over Alex, but over the doubt and fear that had held me back for so long. Looking back, the journey was anything but easy. There were nights when I felt like giving up, days when the bitterness threatened to swallow me whole. But each challenge reminded me that I was stronger than I'd ever realized. Rebuilding my life wasn't just about finances or career success. It was about reclaiming my independence, my confidence, and my sense of self. Alex's betrayal had been a turning point, but it didn't define me. Now, with a supportive partner, a thriving business, and a renewed sense of purpose, I finally felt like I was living the life I deserved. Every choice I'd made, every sacrifice, had led me to this moment, and for the first time in years, I could honestly say I was happy. It's amazing how time and perspective can shift the way you see your life. If you told me a few years ago that I'd be where I am now, I probably wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I was drowning in betrayal, anger, and self-doubt. But fast forward to today, and I can honestly say I'm thriving. It didn't happen overnight, of course. Rebuilding my life was a process, a long, often painful one, but every step forward brought me closer to where I wanted to be. The second job I took to make ends meet eventually turned into a career pivot. I found a position at a company where my hard work was recognized and rewarded. For the first time in years, I felt valued and capable. My evenings weren't filled with tears and exhaustion anymore. Instead, they were spent with Sam, my partner, who continued to be my rock through it all. Together, we built a life that felt stable and joyful, a sharp contrast to the chaos Alex had left in their wake. As for Alex, our relationship had settled into an odd sort of neutrality. After their tearful apology, they tried to reach out a few more times, but I kept my boundaries firm. Over time, they seemed to accept that we'd never go back to being the close siblings we once were. When we did cross paths at family gatherings or mutual events, we were polite, cordial, even, but there was an unspoken understanding that things were different now. Alex didn't try to justify their actions anymore, and I didn't bring up the past. But there was no ignoring the contrast between our lives. While I had worked hard to rebuild and grow, Alex was still trying to piece things together. Their bankruptcy had left them financially and socially isolated, and many of the people who once orbited their glittering life had vanished when the money dried up. It wasn't easy to watch. A part of me still wanted to step in, to help them find their footing again. But I reminded myself that it wasn't my responsibility. Alex had made their choices, and they needed to live with the consequences. Looking back, I don't regret giving up the inheritance. That might sound strange, considering how much pain it caused me at the time, but the experience taught me lessons I wouldn't trade for anything. I learned how to set boundaries, how to protect myself from people who didn't have my best interests at heart. I learned the value of resilience, how to pick myself up when life knocked me down. And perhaps most importantly, I learned the importance of self-worth. For so long, I'd let guilt and obligation dictate my decisions, putting Alex's needs above my own. Letting go of that mindset wasn't just freeing, it was transformative. It allowed me to focus on what I wanted, what I needed, and how I could build a life that felt authentic and fulfilling. These days, that life is better than I ever imagined. I wake up each morning with a sense of purpose, knowing I've earned every bit of what I have. My job is challenging in the best way, pushing me to grow and rewarding my efforts. My relationship with Sam is a source of constant joy and support. We've even started traveling regularly, ticking off destinations on a bucket list I once thought I'd never get to. Last year, we spent a month backpacking through Southeast Asia, immersing ourselves in the vibrant cultures and breathtaking landscapes. It was the kind of trip I used to dream about when I was stuck working 2 jobs, wondering if life would ever get easier. Every step forward feels like a victory, not just over the challenges Alex's betrayal created, but over my own doubts and fears. As for Alex, I hear bits and pieces about their life through mutual connections. They've managed to find some stability, though it's clear they're still trying to figure things out. They've taken on a modest job and moved to a smaller apartment, far removed from the luxury they once flaunted. I don't revel in their struggles, but I also don't feel responsible for them. Alex's life is their own to rebuild, just as mine was. When people ask if I miss the relationship we used to have, I'm honest. Yes, sometimes I do. I miss the version of Alex I thought I knew, the sibling I trusted and cared for without hesitation. But I also know that clinging to that past would only hold me back. These days, I focus on the present and the future. I've built a life I'm proud of, one rooted in hard work, determination, and integrity. It's a life that feels truly mine, untainted by lies or manipulation. The journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. And as I look ahead, I feel nothing but gratitude for the lessons I've learned and the strength I've gained along the way. Alex may still be figuring things out, but that's not my problem anymore. For the first time in years, I'm living my best life, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Life has a funny way of revealing its secrets when you least expect it. Just when I thought I'd moved past the chaos Alex had brought into my life, one final twist landed in my lap, proof that their deception ran even deeper than I'd imagined. It started with a routine check-in with Teresa, the private investigator I'd hired years ago to uncover Alex's hidden assets. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but I kept her contact saved, just in case. Something told me to reach out, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. What if there were still loose ends I didn't know about? When I called Teresa, she greeted me warmly, but her tone shifted when I mentioned Alex.
"Funny you should call," she said.
"I came across something recently while working another case. It's related to those accounts I found for your sibling." My heart sank. I thought I'd put all this behind me. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well," Teresa began, "while following up on some overseas banking activity for another client, I noticed a familiar account number. It matched one of the accounts I flagged for Alex during our investigation. That got my attention." "Are you saying they're still moving money?" Teresa hesitated. "Not exactly. The account was dormant for a while, but there was a recent withdrawal, significant enough to raise red flags. It looks like Alex transferred the remaining funds to another offshore account, likely to keep it hidden." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. Even after everything, Alex was still clinging to their ill-gotten gains, trying to stay one step ahead. Teresa provided me with the details she'd uncovered, including documentation of the transfer. It was all there: dates, amounts, and the name of the bank in a well-known tax haven. Legally, I could have used this information to pursue Alex and recover my portion of the inheritance. But as tempting as it was, I knew it wasn't worth the energy. Dragging Alex through the courts would only reopen old wounds, not to mention the emotional toll it would take on me. I'd fought so hard to rebuild my life and find peace. Was it really worth risking that for money I'd already learned to live without? After a few sleepless nights, I made a decision. I wasn't going to go after the money. But I wasn't going to let Alex get away with it, either. Instead, I took the evidence Teresa had provided and anonymously submitted it to a financial crimes unit. It felt like the right thing to do, not out of spite, but out of a sense of justice. People like Alex, who manipulate and cheat their way through life, need to be held accountable. The months that followed were quiet. I went about my life, focusing on my work, my relationship with Sam, and the small joys that filled my days. I almost forgot about the report I'd submitted, until one evening when I got a call from a mutual acquaintance. "Did you hear about Alex?" they asked, their voice brimming with curiosity. My stomach tightened. "No," I said cautiously. "What happened?" "They're under investigation for tax fraud," they replied. "Something about offshore accounts and undeclared income. It's all over their social circle. No one can believe it." I hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. Part of me felt vindicated, knowing Alex was finally facing consequences for their actions. But another part of me felt a twinge of sadness. No matter how much they'd hurt me, Alex was still my sibling. Watching them self-destruct wasn't something I took pleasure in. Over the next few weeks, I heard bits and pieces about the investigation. Alex had lawyered up, but their once unshakable confidence was nowhere to be found. They'd alienated most of their friends and were scrambling to salvage what little remained of their reputation. As for me, I stayed out of it. I didn't reach out, didn't comment, and didn't involve myself in any way. The person Alex had become was a stranger to me, and I wasn't going to let their mess drag me down again. Looking back, the whole ordeal feels surreal, like something out of a bad movie. But it also feels like the final chapter in a story I've spent years trying to close. Alex's downfall wasn't something I sought out or celebrated, but it was a reminder that actions have consequences. They'd spent years lying, manipulating, and taking from others without a second thought. In the end, it caught up to them. As for me, I'm at peace. I've built a life I'm proud of, filled with love, purpose, and integrity. I don't need Alex's money, or their approval, or even their apology. Life is too short to dwell on people who can't be trusted. I've let go of the bitterness, the anger, and the pain, choosing instead to focus on the future I've created for myself. Alex may still be figuring things out, but that's not my burden to bear. And for the first time in a long time, I can honestly say I'm good with that.